I had some feedback that was like, why do we need a certification? And it's like, well, in complex systems, it can help. So this is the logo that we came up with.
Yeah, great logo.
Yeah, thank you. Originally, I was just thinking we were going to do farm, just permaculture farming. And then Luke and Angela were like, no, we should expand it. And I was like, well, what if we do the three ethics of permaculture? And so that's what we ended up bringing in, was the earth care, people care, and fair share. Um, and uh, and so everyone knows USDA organic, and it's based on the same premise. However, organic is only the beginning. It only verifies chemical free. It doesn't verify regenerative practices that heal the earth. So organic is great. It's a step in response to industrial agriculture. Same with biodynamic agriculture, which Rudolf Steiner also replied, to industrial agriculture and similar processes. He obviously brings in some other aspects, but none of them really look to nature as permaculture does, and as a process. And when you observe nature, it's impressive what nature does when we're not messing with it. And if we can understand how nature does its thing and mimic that, then hopefully we could sequester large amounts of carbon. And so here's what if you could reverse climate change, droughts and desertification, and species extinction, all with your purchases. So this is sort of the vision of what's possible, and that's where Permaganic comes in. And then as we worked on it, we eventually laid out that, well, not every farm is going to be the highest performing permaculture farm right off the bat, as we all know. So we wanted to make it accessible to organic farmers and transitioning from organic to this regenerative model. So the pioneer model is basically that you're laying the groundwork, if you will, to move away from unsustainable practices, especially tillage specifically. Emergent is when you're really laying out the infrastructure, be it keyline design processes, perennial farming processes, also educating people is a piece. And I'll get into that here with some of the details of each element: earth care, people care, and fair share. And then regenerative being the highest standard. So, and also having a logo that conveys that to the customer. That's a key element that we have here. The video, actually, we hadn't quite solidified the emergent and the pioneer. So really bringing organic to the next level. And this, I've known Mark Shepard for years. After I came back studying with Bill, a local farmer had brought him down to consult in their farm in northern Kentucky. I had read his articles previously in the Activist magazine about his farm. I've been up there as well. Mark's a great guy. He's doing some real tough pioneering work. And he's successful at it, which is great. And it's probably one of the largest farms in the Midwest that I know of, and probably one of the larger in the country, if not the largest. And I might have the amount of acreage that he has off. I can't remember if it's 100 or 160, but connecting someone like him or other farmers along those lines, and people like Joel Salatin, I've heard some things about him in the recent years, but both of them years ago, I presented this idea to them. Joel apparently wasn't too big into it because his name always preceded himself. Mark had some interest, but to their customers. And that's the purpose of a certification is to, if you're not a big name, you're not a published author, that how do you get recognition for the work that you're doing? To build a regenerative farm and a regenerative culture. And that's what the certification is, to inform customers of your hard work and let them know that you are meeting that standard. And so that through their, as long as we're in an industrial society, as Toby Hemingway points out in the Permaculture City, like zoning out your food sources. Yes, it's great to grow as much as possible, and it's a great standard, but a lot of people don't have that capacity. And so being able to create a transition while we still can, and not just run off a cliff, transition is really critical. So, but giving these opportunities while there's still a high energy culture that's still functioning, um, to give these opportunities to allow farmers to invest in their farms and get recognition and make a living. Farming is hard. It is not easy. There's no guarantees. Um, Things happen. And industrial farming, we know it doesn't work. We know it's brittle. Permaculture is hopefully this transitional model that can bring people away from that. So, uh, a lot of the practices that we're working with, I did forget to mention that I did do the carbon farming class back in 2012 up in New York. And that was where we had our soft launch. And, Eric Tonesmeyer was there, Darren Doherty, Joel Salatin, Dr. Ingham, Dave Jackie, Holistic Management International with Dr.
Wow. What a
Adams.
crew.
Yeah, it was. Wes Jackson, too.
Yeah.
And so it was a 3-week course, but almost all those practices, and Eric Tonesmeyer ended up becoming the drawdown.org's one of their fellows. They had a lot of fellows, but he brought a lot of the regenerative agriculture to their awareness and identified it as one of the top strategies that we could employ to reverse climate change, of which, Permaganic Authenticated is, certifying those practices, and that,
Right.
be it regenerative agriculture, be it, another one is tropical tree staple crops, which one of my Haitian students was with an NGO down in Haiti
Right.
doing that kind of work. So drawdown.org, great resource. I show this to my students all the time because it gives you awareness that there are solutions to problems, and especially climate change. That's what got me into sustainable design 25 years ago. So the program itself, it's a comprehensive certification process. As we mentioned, there's Earth Care, People Care, Fair Share. We have the Pioneer, Emergent, Regenerative model. But basically, the Pioneer is like that you're starting to lay the foundations. The Emergent, as I mentioned before, you're implementing things like orcharding and agroforestry. At this point, you're really shifting towards perennials, no tillage. Pioneer, you're also doing no tillage, doing compost teas, mob grazing, things like that. The higher you go, though, you're implementing more long-term systems that are not easy to back out of. So once you commit to putting in a keyline design system, be it with a keyline subsoiler or swales or ponds or all that, the chances, and once you plant an orchard on contour, if you will, your chances of backing out are, and going back to an industrial model or even organic model are not that great. And so that's why the emergent, you're really laying that foundation, and then regenerative is when you're really implementing it. The earth care is agriculture, as I mentioned. So you might be doing mob grazing and things like that. People care has two elements, which is community care and doing educational outreach. And so that could be giving farm tours of your farm to so many people a year. So as you can see, the highest level here, and some of these have changed, but as you'll see in the agriculture stuff, but the community care, if you gave a tour a 1-hour tour to 2,000 people a year, that would qualify for it. Or if you trained 3 interns for a whole year for 40 hours a week, that's 120 hours a week. Really at that point, you're talking about 10 weeks or something. So 10 weeks of interns. So that would also qualify. But then we also have the built environment, which incorporates people care. So you've got the educational element, building this culture and informing the world. And then the built environment is real basic, starting off with an energy audit and doing water harvesting. And then the emergent level is energy creation and water harvesting. And then the built regenerative level is off-grid or net yield. net positive. So similar to Living Building Challenge or an Earthship, or that you're producing more than your building is consuming. And then the fair share, we have two elements there as well, which is the community aspect and then the ecological aspect. And some people, we've tried to be flexible with this because we know farming's a hard profession, but that you could be donating excess production that isn't being sold to a local community nonprofit that deals with food access. But here we have community donations for the pioneer level of 5% of harvest. The emergent level is 10% donated. And again, that could just be produce that didn't sell that day at market and isn't going to last. And then regenerative is your farm creates and supports new structures for reliable distribution of surplus services, time, etc., to support the creation of a regenerative culture. So that one, it's sort of, we have several organizations that are doing this. And so it is a tough, high standard at the regenerative level.
Yeah, it's like you're creating a food hub or something like that.
Exactly.
At that level. Yeah.
And really looking at a community, how do we create fair share within the community? And that is an important aspect of permaculture. Every time I hear people planet profit, I'm like, if you listen to the order of that, there's something off. And the people is first, the planet is second, and the profit is third. Whereas permaculture is very intentional. And I always feel like, I don't know the story of people, planet, profit, but I hear a lot of it around, in sustainable business. But earth care is very intentional. Earth care is first, because if you don't take care of it, people don't get taken care of. You can end up with famines. And then the fair share, or return the surplus to the first two ethics, which is what Mollison says, but we like to say fair share because it's simple and it rhymes. But return it to the first two. And so that's what you see here. And with the ecological one, 5% of your land is dedicated to ecosystem restoration. And I can skip ahead here. Let me do that because that'll give a little bit more. So here you can see the emergent.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 10% is donated. Then ecological, 25% of land is dedicated to ecosystem restoration. 8% of that could be wild or managed, and managed wilds, which could be harvested. It could be sustainably timbered. And then 17% could be regenerative agriculture. The highest standard here is 50% of fair share, which is 10% of wild or managed wilds. And then 40% regenerative agriculture. So we haven't set the uttermost highest bar. And the one thing I will say, and this will get into the next couple slides, is that, and this is Mollison's farm here, but that this is also an evolutionary process, this certification. But Mollison's would qualify for that. That to me was always this standard, his Tagari farm. I didn't get to visit, but Mollison's is a great example of where, I always tell, like, when we're talking about drought issues, like Mollison's farm had 3 2-inch pipes of water coming off of it at all times because he had turned the farm into a sponge, in terms of swales and ponds and forests and building soil, and all of that holds water and stabilizes the hydrological cycle, which is how humans could, as I always tell my students, referencing the book 1491 that Scott Pittman told us about.
Yeah.
About how the Amazon rainforest could be a human-created artifact. And it's like, we can either dehydrate landscapes or hydrate, and it just depends on our design process. So.
Yeah, there's China's doing sponge city designs. I don't know if you've come across that, but it's very, very similar. Just the idea of, like, instead of fighting against all these water issues that we have, like, just design things to be sponges in the first place. And Bill's doing it here. I mean, you can just see the landscape just dotted with water features, and it's great.
And his neighbors during the dry season, from what I've heard, is that they didn't have water. They were brown. They completely dried out, and his farm was.
They're like looking over the fence, like, "What's he doing?"
How is that guy I do? And, you
Yeah.
know, and that was what PAM, I mean, the
Yeah.
roots of, PAM and key line design and all that, just
That's
like,
right.
and it's interesting because being in the Midwest, I always say that our legacy and heritage, one of our local teachers, her husband is an archaeologist and has done a lot of work at Fort Ancient, which is right off I-71, which cuts across Ohio. They Fort Ancient was, I forget how old it is, 3,000 years old, something. I don't know. It might be newer than that, but it was water harvesting. The mound building culture had a lot of water harvesting
All
built in.
right. That makes sense. I never thought about that. Huh.
Yeah, and some of it became sacred, like Serpent Mound and Circle Mounds, but oftentimes something that's critical in your culture becomes sacred inherently.
Yeah.
So out of it they build these other types of mounds. But
Mm.
Fort Ancient is up on top of a ridge. It's a very dry ridge, and then it has these big divots. And basically, her and her husband, they wrote an article for the Permaculture Activist magazine years ago, before his design magazine, um, about the water management of that
Cool.
site. So,
Great.
it's not exclusive to permaculture, but I always say permaculture is the best process we have for deindustrialization.
Mm.
So, in terms of finding free resources, which is what industrialization was all about,
Yeah.
quote unquote free. You drill the ground, or you're Jed Clampett shooting the ground. We got oil. But so we did go through the process and get the USPTO approval, as you can see, March 21st, 2017. It was quite a process. We worked with some trademark lawyers that did their work pro bono through local arts organizations,
Mm.
and did get approval.
Great.
And it required a lot of processes. So it is protected, which basically means that, you know, if you don't have this protection, you can't hold anyone accountable if someone rips it off. So
Yeah.
this allows you to hold people. If a farm really is regenerative and they earn this certificate or this certification, then they deserve the recognition, not someone
Yes.
who's not really doing the real deal.
Mm.
So, and we have a plan. We had to file it with the USPTO because ultimately a certification trademark, a certification mark, is a specific type of trademark. I had to learn a lot of legalese, invisible structures. And there is something beneficial about that, which is that basically a certification mark is not owned by us, it's owned by the people who are certified. So,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So ultimately, what will happen is once we get 100 farms, and this is what we filed with them, once we get 100 farms nationally, then we'll create a national standards board,
Mm.
and they will be appointed to run the certification. And that board is made up of um, experts in all areas of permaculture. So everything from the farming to the food processing to architecture and building, and representatives. And then there's also representatives of each bioregional standards board. So similar to PINA, we recognize that you can't have one sweeping certification because Arizona's climate and farming processes are very different than Maine or Florida.
Yes.
So we had to have standards. And so that bioregional standards board down here, the second bullet point is the bioregional councils are enacted when 100 farms are achieved in a bioregion. And those are made up of the Bioregional Research Council, which basically would be working with some of the farmers to try to do research to come up with better practices. We want this to evolve and say, well, we don't want that cultivar of apple in this region because it doesn't work, or we don't want, or we know that swales in this type of soil don't work. Um, you
Yeah.
know, in our region in Cincinnati, we have shale limestone soils, and building swales on these hillsides, especially if there's any built structures, can create landslides. So
Yeah.
you really want to have experts that are doing research and really getting to know a region's soils, which is what that's what our land grant universities were supposed to do. And they did, but they just responded to industrialization, because industrialization destroys markets, and cheap energy makes time and a lot. I mean, it basically collapses markets, if you will. So
Yeah, and local knowledge and local culture.
yeah, and practices and things that people evolved with. I mean, every culture around the world, we had to have that knowledge, and
That's right.
industrialization just eradicated it because of markets. And so as we try to rebuild that, it'd be great if land grant universities got back on board, and I think some are trying to, and we are actually trying to work right now with one, but it's a transition process, so it's tricky. Um, and then we also have this bioregional standards board, which would aggregate research data into standards, and this would hopefully be made up of people. And the challenge with organic is that some of that became such an industry that some of those standards have been weakened. So for us to always look to nature, that is the key. So
yeah.
So here's this is a great chart. I forget where I got it. I think I got it from Wes Jackson, actually, and he got it from someone else. But it's just all the different climates around the world, and from polar, cold, to tropical at the bottom, from dry to wet, dry on the left, wet on the right. And so every ecosystem would have its own practices, not just agriculture, but also architecturally, and then also culturally. What resources. It's interesting because teaching at a design school, like clothes, local clothes were made from, like my family. Cincinnati is a very big German heritage, and going to Oktoberfest and people wearing lederhosen, which is leather pants. You did that because that's how that was the resources you had to make clothes. So everything in a culture, and this is what I love about permaculture and what Mollison really pieced together, is how cultures arise out of the landscapes. Exactly. And the more you can understand and create standards that ensure the productivity of these ecosystems, the better. And hopefully moving towards more humid climate or wet production climates rather than deserts, which is what we've been doing for 10,000 years. So the current cost to get certified, we've tried to keep it cheap. I think this is pretty cheap, especially competitive with organic. It's $400 for the initial certification, and then for every farm over 20 acres, it's $25, and then $1 every acre after that. And then also travel time, because we don't have a lot of certifiers. We really only have the capacity to manage the Midwest. However, if anyone wants to become a certifier, we encourage them to contact us, because we would love to have this go across the country. And hopefully we can then train them if they're not already well trained, and working with local farms to try to get them certified. But anything over 30 minutes, we try to remunerate those people for their time. And then annual auditing is, so if you're in the pioneer level, it's $200. If you're in the emergent level, it's $300, but it's every other year, so you're saving $50 a year. And then regenerative is every third year, so it drops to $100 per year. And so we're actually trying to use reverse economics, if you will, or incentives, that the higher you go, the less it costs. So
I like that. It's a reward built in.
It is. And, that's our goal, is to create more regenerative farms. We don't want people to stay at the pioneer level. We want them to move to regenerative, and then, and hopefully saving money, which that is, saving $300 or $100 every year. So.
This is my experience as a teacher, a couple of thousand people over 30 some years. Everyone is moved by this. virtually everyone is moving. And many, many, many people, maybe even the majority, have a life-transforming experience when they encounter it. It's like there's no going back. There is no going back. It's like you went right through the looking glass.